I'm waiting to when I have to, so it might not be till late in the convention.
Oh, boy.
So I guess, could you share with us a little bit about your meeting with the Archbishop and maybe give some insight if the Anglican Covenant came up and take it from there maybe?
Sure. I'll start. We met with him for about a half an hour and just finished, and it was gracious of him to be with us. We enjoyed that very much. And the topic, of course, largely was our polity and the language that is used and directed to our church by primates and Archbishop and others with regards to whatever it happens to be that the primates or other members of the Anglican Communion want the Episcopal Church to do. Except for the Windsor Report, most of the requests that have come to us have been directed to the bishops. And we are a church of more than one order of voices. We have laity and clergy that have equal voice in our church. And our great deep-hope is that we would be included in requests, communications, and directions. And we'll see how that works.
I'm curious if any of the direction and issues that this convention is dealing with on unions, marriage rights, the ordination of bishops, did any of that come up?
No.
No. Okay. And what about the relationship between Episcopal Church and the larger Anglican Communion and where that's?
Only in the context of how we do business and our governance, and the fact that we're pretty much an anomaly in the Anglican Communion with regards to the voices of all the orders and our decision-making process and our 3-year cycle, which can sometimes be problematic when...
That's the frustration that I think I can say he expressed,
right.
Is that because we're on a 3-year legislative cycle, it's difficult in some cases, for decisions to be held for 3 years for the General Convention to meet. So we discussed some possible scenarios that would allow for a more timely response, at least in the interim, until a permanent response could be made. So there was a lot of give and take in terms of trying to think through how we could work more collaboratively and in a way that honors each other's polity.
What were some of those? You care to share what some of those might have been?
Well, one of them was starting with who they address requests to, that if they address them to the Episcopal Church rather than, for instance, to our House of Bishops, and to allow the Episcopal Church to solve for itself how it will decide who responds, whether it's our Executive Council, whether it's our 2 presiding officers, whether there's a wider consultation process. We were clear with him that the General Convention is the authority in the Episcopal Church, and no one can respond and say we bind the Episcopal Church other than General Convention. So we did talk about that. The first step is make your requests and your statements to the right entity, which is the Episcopal Church. We then have a challenge as our church to figure out how we're going to respond to that and who's going to respond. But don't do that choosing for us.
I think I was struck that he seemed to hear that.
He did.
Right, and I thought that the example that Sally raised, which was when I guess it was the primates asked the House of Bishops to interpret, to clarify the meaning of the resolution, the controversial resolution that we passed 3 years ago, B033, and what it meant. What does that term mean? That we use there on what was the term?
We use manner of
life. And did that mean
and
same-sex couples in a permanent relationship?
I think one thing
And so that was a very good way. That was a very good example. And we could say that first it was the problem of who was addressed in that, and that the House of Bishops was addressed rather than the Episcopal Church. But also when the House of Bishops replied, they were only replying for themselves, that they cannot interpret resolutions of General Convention, because we all have learned, almost in our confirmation class, that General Convention interprets what it does, since we don't have a Supreme Court. And so you do have to have that point where that happens, and that would have happened here. If that question had been asked and we wanted to answer it, we would be answering it during these days.
We also used the example that sometimes others in the communion use the House of Bishops and the Episcopal Church interchangeably, and that happened when the bishops issued their interpretation or clarification that manner of life included non-celibate gays and lesbians. A piece then came out in the Anglican Communion said, the Episcopal Church has said this is what it means, whereas it was our House of Bishops who said it. And those may seem like fine distinctions to other people, but to us they're foundational.
That's where the anomaly comes in, and why it's so difficult to understand.
Don't you think that's because...
Just one second.
Sure.
In terms of this conversation and the conversation we just came out of, I think it's important to be aware that this was not a problem-solving session, with the Archbishop of Canterbury.
Right.
It was a sharing session, so that the conversations were not, here's a solution, or there's nobody accountable to the suggestion or anything like that. So that was part of the conversation, but that's not why we were there. We were not there to come up with a master plan by which all these things be dealt with. It was an opportunity to talk and share. So that, I think in terms of the manner in which you all understand what we were doing, it was not...
The context.
It was not that. We were not a decision-making body. We were not seeking to make decisions. We did talk about some avenues one might go, but that's not why we're there.
Very good.
That's good clarification.